Hi, I'm James Eade at the Eade Foundation, and this is episode 59 of the Chess Files. The answers are out there. What's today's question? Today's question is, what's Jim Eade going to tell Chris Torres Chess Camp? The students there want to know a little bit about what I have to say about chess. That's the idea anyways. Please, I would like you all to do me a favor, and I'm going to put a crawl across the bottom of the screen that lets you know, let's see, what should I tell you to do? Let's go to the Eade Foundation YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel can be found by doing a search. If you're on YouTube, do a search on the Eade Foundation, and that's how you'll find me. That's how you'll find all of the various episodes that we broadcast. And this is episode 59. And so what will I tell the students today? The thing is I like to think about chess in the way that it was originally created was a way to amuse people when they weren't fighting with each other. They created a war game. So, practicing nonviolence, we have a way of being able to compete without actually hurting anyone else. We just compete over the board. And then we shake hands before, we shake hands after, or we bump this before and fist bump after. And then we can analyze the games together, and it can be a lot of fun. And so if you're playing chess and you're having fun, keep playing chess. If you're playing chess and you're not having fun, talk to someone who can help you, because we want to build communities through chess. And the way you do that is by communicating with one another. And by communicating with one another, you become friends. Sometimes these friendships can last a lifetime. So this is one of the messages that I want to give everyone here. And how do you play chess better? Well, that's another topic entirely, and we'll go into that a little bit. But we can't do that in just one broadcast. A little bit about the Eade Foundation. We try to build communities through chess, and the Eade Foundation is here to help people who are basically not being helped. And so wherever you are, whatever country you're from, whatever language you speak, it just doesn't matter to us. We'll help you. Reach out to us and we'll try to get you chess equipment, get you started, build a chess community wherever you are. If you're part of the online chess community already, then you can play chess with anyone, anywhere, at any time. It's cool. Chess is a killer app for the internet. But if you don't have internet access, build a community wherever you are. That's what the Eade Foundation is all about. And we just had the Chess Journalist of America Awards were announced last week, and I wanted to point out that, hey, look at that, we won one, and we got an honorable mention and another. Oh, and did I forget, this is George Mirajanian, and that's episode 40. If you want to go and subscribe, by all means, subscribe to this channel, and you can go and find episode 40. That was my interview with George. It was one of my favorites. Another one of my favorites was with Cyrus Lakdawala and Karsten Hansen. He spells it with an E. Can you imagine that? Hansen with an E. But in any case, that was also an honorable mention this year. So I was pretty happy with that. A couple of the interviews that I did got recognized by the Chess Journalists of America and the website that we've created. Let's see. This is where you can get the YouTube Foundation. Let me point you to the website. Can I do that? I think I can. Yeah, that's it. God, I don't even have my technical support helping me right now, and I'm doing it all by myself. I'm really proud. Just go to eatefoundation.org, and you can find the website that has won. Let's see if I can find that again. The best overall website for a small organization. Hey, we're small, but we're growing. So let's get down to work here. Let's talk about what I can tell people in a general sense about how to get better. All right. Normally, we break down chess into 3 stages: the openings, the middle games, and the endings. So what can I tell you? It depends on how strong you are. We usually use ratings to determine our strength. It's merit-based. If you win against a lot of players, your rating goes up. And if you don't, your rating stays the same or goes down. So you can pretty much tell where you are, but I'll also, there's so much individual variation. Like, for example, players that were rated around what I was rated, some of them were really good at one stage, not so good at another. So you try to steer the game to where they weren't so good. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So this is the thing where openings, middle games, and endings. Now, openings is a lot of preparation, or you can play according to general principles. Now, middle games, when you're at a certain stage, it's all tactics, 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 tactics. What do I mean by tactics? Forks, pins, skewers, the types of things that can change the nature of a game with one move, or a combination of moves that leads to a win of material. We're going to get more into material. What do I mean by that word? Material. But the idea is to practice these, and the way I can recommend that you do that is to get a series of forks, of positions. There are books out there, videos out there that will give you a lot of practice until you become used to what a fork is. And you can see that fork, and it becomes chess as a game of pattern recognition. If you recognize the patterns, the moves jump off the board and tell you to play them. And you know what to do. It's intuitively obvious what to do. And you don't have to worry so much about calculations, thinking it in what, if I do this, he does that. If I do that, he does that, blah, blah, blah. Or she can play this. What if I don't like what she plays? You can't do that kind of stuff all the time. Sometimes the pattern suggests itself, and you just get the order of the moves correctly. And it's simple. It just becomes simple if you recognize the pattern. And that's what tactics are, pattern recognition. So play over a lot of positions that say white to move and win, black to move and win, and do like 50 that are forks until you know what a fork is, 50 that are pins, so that you know what a pin is. You see it immediately, see the possibility. When a queen and a king are lined up on a diagonal, you think, can I pin it? If the queen and the king are lined up on a rank, can I pin it? And if they're lined up on a diagonal, you're looking like, can I pin it with my bishop? If they're lined up on a rank or file, you can say, can I pin it with a rook? Because that's, queens are worth more than rooks. We know that, right? Queens are stronger than rooks. So if you can pin a queen with a rook and win it, you win material. We'll come back to that. So, skewers are another tactic. Find a book or some online video or just practice at least 50 skewers. And it'll be a pattern that is embedded in your brain, and you will recognize it when it's available over the board. The other stage of the game that we normally talk about is the ending. That's when most of the pieces have been cleared. And the idea then is to be able to queen a pawn, advance a pawn to the 8th rank, and then you can queen it. You can turn it into anything, a rook, a bishop, a knight. But, generally speaking, since the queen is the most powerful piece, you want to advance your pawn and queen it. We call it the queening square. So the pawn will advance and become so much more powerful. Pawn is the basic unit of force. We talk about it equal to 1, and the queen would be worth 9 pawns. 9. That's a lot. And the rook we generally say is 5. And so, most of the endings that you want to know basic mates. You want to be able to mate with queen. You want to be able to mate with a rook. You want to be able to mate with 2 bishops. You can mate with a bishop and knight, but that is pretty much a rare occurrence in chess. And it's not worth spending a whole lot of time when you're at the early stages of your development as a chess player. So, but you do need to know how to mate with the queen, with the rook. These happen a lot. So these are the types of endings that you want to study, to master. And there are certain endgame positions. And now, rook and pawn endings can be quite complicated, but there are certain rook and pawn endings that you should know whether or not they're won or lost. Because the transition from the middle game to the ending can be complicated, but it becomes simple if you know that the ending is won. Or if you're defending, if you know the ending can be drawn. This will improve your results, this knowledge, this endgame knowledge of what is one ending and what is a lost ending and what is a drawn ending. If you know that, it eases the burden of your middle game calculations. I can't emphasize that enough. But what do people normally do? They normally do a lot of opening preparation. So I'm going to return to opening preparation. How important is it? How much energy should you spend? How much time and energy should you spend on opening preparation? How much time and energy should you spend on middle game tactics? How much time and energy should you spend on endings? We'll talk about that. But I want to talk a little bit about what I call the elements of chess. And I wrote a book. It's called Chess for Dummies. And I talk about the elements of chess in this book. And I'm just refreshing my memory, but I don't really need to. Space is one of the elements of chess. Now, you can think of chess as a game of spatial conquest. Think of these armies that we were talking about. Chess is based, a way to practice warfare. When it's too cold out to actually do warfare. And you can think of the kings and queens and the knights in the Middle Ages and the ladies in waiting. They would entertain themselves by playing a game of chess. It's often called a royal game because of that. It's not like that anymore, of course. Anyone could play chess. We're teaching young kids. They're amazingly good. They're amazingly strong and amazingly young ages now. So anyone can play chess. This is the point of the book, Chess for Dummies. You think chess is too complicated? No. This book demystifies the game because there are rules. You have to learn the rules. And once you learn the rules, you're at ground zero. There's a lot to learn. But anyone can learn it. And when we teach kids to play chess, we give them a gift of life that lasts a lifetime. Because chess, the gift that you give a child when they learn to play chess is immediately transferable back into the classroom. The ability to sit still and think, your ability to focus and concentrate. These can be applied to any discipline. So it's an educational tool when you're young. And it's a pleasant pastime when you're an adult. Sometimes it's just a break from your workaday life. There's problems and tension at the work, well, you can relax over a game of chess. And you can do it with your kids. You can do it with friends. People go to coffee shops and play. And now everybody can play on the internet at any time. And, it's a way of just getting away from the everyday world. The problems of the world go away when you're playing chess. You're only focused on the game. It's delightful for adults. It's a solace in old age as well, because you're not worrying about your doctor's appointment or your medical bills when you're playing chess. Again, you're transported into another dimension and you're just focused on the game and those 64 squares and the pieces that are on them. And that's all that matters for however long you're playing. And it's a welcome respite. So it lasts a lifetime when you teach children to play chess. And I'm talking to the chess parents now. You're giving the gift of chess to a child. Potentially lasts a lifetime. And it also allows them to meet others with a shared interest. They have something in common right away. It doesn't matter what country they're from. It doesn't matter what language they speak. They have something in common. They can bond over this. They can form friendships that last a lifetime. This is the gift that my father gave to me when he taught me the game of chess. And I got to speak with people that were my grandparents' age. I never got to know my grandfathers, but I did play a lot of people in chess that would have been my grandfather's age. And they got to share with me some of the life lessons that they had learned. It's very valuable for me. So it's intergenerational as well. All the things that I can say about chess. So if you're a grown-up playing with a child, when you're a teenager playing with a senior citizen, this is all possible. And you're playing the same game. You're speaking the same language. And all those other differences fade away over the similarities that you have in common. So this is the gift of chess. And the elements of chess, first when I talk about is space, because chess was a game of spatial conquest. So gaining more space. You think of the medieval armies, their goal was to press in the middle and divide the enemy forces into two smaller camps. And this is, you also see this in chess. If you control the center of the board, you gain a lasting advantage. Now, occupation is not the same as control. We occupy the central squares. That's great, but that also means that you can be attacked. And can you defend yourself when you're in the center of the board? Can you maintain your position? These are critical elements, and the stronger you get at chess, the more you can intuitively know whether or not you can. Sometimes the control of the center comes from a distance. Think of archers in the old medieval ages, pulling their bows back and shooting from a distance so that they were not subject to attack themselves, but they could attack from a long range. So control of the center is more important than occupation, but the center is where the action is. Now, in the early stages of the game, do you want to move your king out to the center? No, because king safety is another element of chess. We usually tuck our kings into the corner to keep them safe and fight where the action is, in the center of the board, fighting for control of the center. Because if I get control of the center, I can push your armies into two smaller camps. And then I can outmaneuver you, because when I can shift my focus from the center to a wing, you will have trouble shifting enough pieces over. And if you do, even once, I'm attacking on your queen side and you're shifting your defenders. It's hard to maneuver when you don't have space, but if you can do it even once, well, guess what? If I have space, I can shift it back to the king side. And no, you can't scurry over as fast as I can shift because I have more space. This is the element of space. And it's not the final frontier in chess, but it is an element that must be paid attention to. You must know the difference. What does space mean in chess? It means that you have more mobility for your pieces. And this is the next element of chess that I want to talk about. We normally call it material or force, the relative value of the pieces. Everybody that's watching this knows that the queen is worth more than the rook, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you know that. I'm not here to tell you that. But why is the queen more valuable? Because it can move to more squares than the rook. The rook can move up and down, side to side, so can the queen. But the queen can also move along the diagonals. So the number of squares that the queen can move to exceed the number of squares that the rook can move to. Therefore, the queen is more valuable. It's more powerful. It's more mobile. This is the point I want you to know, to understand, that mobility is the power of the piece. So a knight tucked into the corner of a board is not mobile. It's almost immobile. But a knight in the center of the board, its mobility is quadrupled. It can move to more squares. It's much more powerful in the center of the board than it is tucked in the corner. Why do we want a knight in the center? Because it's worth more. It's more mobile. And if we have a bishop trapped behind a pawn structure, it can't get out, can't get into the game, it's immobile. Its power is reduced. We say it's worth 3.25 pawns. Not if it can't move. But if it's in the in a well-positioned place. If it's on G2, say, the square, it's fianchettoed, as we say, and it's influencing the long diagonal from H1 to A8. That's a powerful bishop. Sometimes we move it to C4 or F4 to get it into the center. But when you're close to the center, you can be attacked. Sometimes the bishops mobilized in the center can be attacked and have to move again. So we're getting into another element of chess. Besides force, material, the relative strength of the piece, which is tied to its mobility, is the element of time. Often in the opening phase, we call this development. Now, development is critical. The player who gets the pieces to their optimal squares the fastest will generally have a significant advantage. Well, how do you do that? That's a question that we can't get into right now, but that's the goal, to get your pieces to the optimal squares faster than your opponent can. Get them on better squares than your opponent does. Get them there faster than your opponent does. This is a lasting advantage. However, is it as lasting as a material advantage? No, a material advantage. More force is more lasting. It's not permanent, but it's more lasting. And a lead in development can be lasting. We call it the initiative. When you have the initiative, you're dictating the pace of the game. Where the attention is, I'm going to shift to the queen side, shift to the king side. That's the initiative. You're dictating to your opponent where the action is. But that can go away. 40 good moves can be ruined by one bad move, and you will lose the initiative. So it's more of a temporary advantage than a permanent one. And you have to play your moves with precision to secure and maintain and manage and development. So space. Gain more space than your opponent, you'll have a lasting advantage. Material. Have more force, more strength than your opponent. More mobility. Your pieces are more mobile, they will be stronger than your opponents. And that can be a lasting advantage. The question of time. Time can be fleeting. Your opponent can catch up in time. And all of a sudden, the element of time is balanced on either side. If you have an advantage in time, press to convert it into another type of advantage, a more lasting advantage, space, material. Now, above all else, we were talking about king safety. King safety is an element of chess because if you lose your king, you lose the game. If your king is checked and you cannot get out of check, you are checkmated. The game is ended. There's no room for discussion. When you're checkmated, the game is ended. Game over. So, you can lose your queen and fight on. The most powerful piece on the board is the queen. But if she is lost, you can fight on. But you cannot ever fight on when your king is checkmated. That is the end of the game. So king safety trumps all. Doesn't matter if your opponent has more force. Doesn't matter if your opponent has an advantage in space, advantage in time. If your opponent is checkmated, game over. So that's why we castle. We tend to castle. We tend to castle on the king side because the king is slightly safer there than it is on the queen side. There's a little room that the king has to pay attention to if it's on the queen side. There's less room that the king has to worry about on the king side, so we tend to castle king side. Now, must you castle? No. Should you castle? Probably. Until you get to be a very, very advanced player, castling is probably something that I would encourage you to do. King safety trumps all. So we talked about space. Talked about material, force. Talked about the advantage in time to develop your pieces, effectively, efficiently, quickly to optimal square. We talked about king safety. Well, the last thing I want to talk about is pawn structure. Pawn structure. In the old days, when I was coming up, pawn structure wasn't even really always considered an element of chess, but it is. And we've pretty much come to, and it was even Philidor, centuries ago, said that pawns were something like this. He spoke a different language than I do, so I don't know what he actually said, but something like pawns are the soul of chess. And pawn structure dictates where the pieces should be placed. And if you identify the pawn structure, again, we're getting back to we're getting back to pattern recognition. You recognize the pattern of the pawns, the pawn structure, you will intuitively know which pieces to get rid of, which pieces to keep, and the ones you keep, where to put them. All of these complicated, oh my goodness, so chess is so complicated, they become simple. Now, I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Okay, now who knows what this opening is called? What's that in the back? Yes, this opening is called the French. The French defense is arrived at by playing 1e4, 1e6, d4, d5. Now, what's important about this pawn structure? Look at the white duel of pawns, d4, e4. That's optimal, isn't it? The classical way of thinking is yes. You've occupied two center squares, you're attacking two others, and you're attacking squares in the enemy's territory. Ha ha ha. F5 and c5 are being attacked. e5 is being attacked. Oh, so this is glorious. White is clearly better. Isn't that true? Maybe. Notice what has happened also in terms of development. There is a line for the bishop on f1 to develop. There's a line on the bishop on c1 to develop. The queen can also come out. So this is very good in terms of development time, the efficiency of moving your pieces to their optimal squares. And you look at black, look at that bishop on f8. Good diagonal for it to come out. But what about the bishop on c8? Oops, can come out to d7 and no more. It's less mobile, therefore less powerful. So it seems to be clearly winning. But it's not so clear. Because occupation is not control. And we see that the second move by black, d5, challenges e4. Now, this is an interesting thing. Can that e4 pawn might be taken? And that would be a loss of material. Okay, it's just a pawn, the unit of one. But nevertheless, now black is dictating to white what to do. What are you going to do? Defend the pawn? Advance the pawn? Sacrifice the pawn? What are you going to do? So, this is a pawn structure that tells you a little bit about where the pieces go, which pieces are mobile, which pieces are not. So, right away, black, with the bishop on c8, so immobile, says, oh, if I can just trade that, anytime I can trade that bishop. So if white would play bishop to b5, check, we would say, oh, bishop to d7 is called for because I want to get rid of that bishop. The f1 bishop is more powerful than the c8 bishop. If you want to trade them, I'll trade them. So some of these difficult, complicated questions become simple. Now, let's look at a pawn structure that's very similar, but different. This is called the Carol-Kahn. Yes, thank you for answering that question, you in the front. This is the Carol-Kahn. Now, white's moves are the same, e4 and d4. Occupying the center squares, attacking squares in the enemy territory, really good. Lines for the white squared bishop on f1, lines for the dark squared bishop on c1. Everything's great. White is clearly great. However, black has played c6 and d5. Now, isn't this exactly the same as the French? You've got the same thing. The d5 pawn is threatening the e4 pawn. So it's threatening to capture it and win material. Isn't it exactly the same? No. Because remember when the French was played, look at that white squared bishop on c8. Now the Caro-Kann, it's happy. It can move out. It's a powerful piece. The bishop on f8, which was really happy in the French, is not yet happy. Doesn't know where it belongs. Doesn't know where it's going to go. A lot of uncertainty around the bishop on f8. But both the French and the Caro-Kann are completely playable defenses. Completely playable. That's all I ask for from any opening, especially when I'm black. Just when I want to play the game and start playing chess, get out of the opening into the middle game. That was my only goal. Because when you try to get an advantage in the opening, and you should always try to get an advantage anytime you can. You know, it requires a lot of preparation, a lot of work. And is it worth spending a lot of preparation, a lot of time trying to get an edge in the opening? Well, you'll get different people answering that in different ways. And my perspective is play something that you know is sound. It will give you a reasonable game. Get them into the middle game where the action is. Study your tactics. So when tactics present themselves, and they will present themselves, you will know what to do. It'll be intuitively obvious. You've got the pattern recognition of the forks, got the pattern recognition of the bishops, of the pins, of the skewers, and other tactical possibilities. Discover check is a tactic that I love to play. No, discover check. But can you always do them? No. Sometimes your opponent prevents you from doing them. But if they give you the opportunity to pounce, seize the opportunity, and you will win your share of games in what is an intuitively obvious way. If you have developed the pattern recognition, that preparation is far more important than knowing various variations and openings that may or may not be played in your game. So yes, put your energies into your tactics. Once you have that, then the opening moves, as long as you just reach a sound position, playable position, your tactical knowledge will decide the game's outcome far more often than your opening preparation will. Trust me on that one. Now, we've seen the French defense. We've seen the Caro-Kann defense. You know the pawn structures. You know the influence it has on the game, on where the pieces are, on space, on the elements of space. Now, look at this. Isn't this the same pawn structure from black as in the French? Yes, it is. But white hasn't played e4, d4. White has played d4, c4. So it's important to know the difference in this pawn structure compared to this pawn structure. What is different in these pawn structures? The French, the Caro-Kann, the Queen's Gambit. Now, you can see right away that like in the French, the bishop on c8, the white squared bishop, is kind of sad, kind of pouty, doesn't have anywhere to go on the c8, h3 diagonal. But the bishop on f8 is pretty happy, can get out and fight right away. And he's even thinking about bishop to b4 check. Now, check is not checkmate. So don't fall for a check every time. Don't check every time you can. But always keep it in the back of your mind. You always know that a check must be responded to. You must either take the piece that's giving check, move the king, or get in between the checker and the king with one of your pieces. So it's a very forcing move, but it isn't necessarily the best move. Look around for something better. When you see a good move, look around for something better. Checks that serve no purpose, but to develop your opponent's pieces are a bad idea. Don't do them. Let's get back to pawn structure. Now, the e4 pawn is not advanced, so the bishop on f1 doesn't know where it belongs, doesn't know where it's going to end up. Now, the bishop on c1 says, oh, I want to go to f4 or g5. Can't go to g5 right now because the queen would take it. Okay, so I'm not sure where exactly the bishop is going to go, but you know what thing I do know? The knight belongs on c3. It's intuitively obvious that the knight belongs on c3 because the knight on c3 would be attacking the d5 square and the e4 square. These are central squares, and they are being attacked by the knight on c3. Very good development, exactly where the knight belongs. So if black doesn't do something that you have to take into account right away, knight to c3 is just crying out to be played. But what's crying out to be played for black? Well, he's saying, I've got the d5 square, and as long as I've got that square, I'm going to have half the center. I'm going to control d5 and try to control e4. So knight to f6 is looking like a very reasonable move, because the knight on f6 would attack d5 and e4, just like the knight on c3 would. So already the pawn structures are determining where the piece placement should be. Now remember the Carol-Kahn pawn structure. Well, this is the pawn structure of the Slav. It's the same structure from the black point of view. The white structure is different. Instead of e4, d4, we play d4, c4. Now, what does this tell you? Well, look at that bishop, which is in the French, and the queen's gambit declined. The bishop on c8 is so sad. Now it's happy. It is mobile. The mobility of the piece determines its power. The more powerful the piece, the happier the piece is. Immobile, unhappy. Mobile, happy. So these are the things that I want you to pay attention to. Pawn structure. Now, I haven't even talked about isolated pawns, doubled pawns, the weaknesses in the pawn structure. These can be permanent weaknesses and can decide the games. So pawn structure is a lot more than what I just explained. But learning pawn structures, where the pieces belong and which pawn structures, this gives you the ability to just walk by a board and look over and get a sense of what opening that probably was, because you look at the pawn structure. When I look by a board, I count pawns first because I assume the pieces are going to be the same value. But does somebody have an edge and a pawn? Is it one per side of pawn up or pawn down? And I look at the pawn structure. So the pawn structure will tell me where the pieces should be. And if the pieces are where they should be, I would say, oh, okay, that's a well-played game. If the pieces aren't where they should be based on the pawn structure, and then, well, someone's not got the hang of this. They're not playing this game the way it needs to be played, the way it's crying out to be played. These things become intuitively obvious. They call out to you. You get a square in enemy territory supported by a pawn. The knight wants to move to that square. The knight is calling, please move me to d5. Please move me to d5. And you'll hear those whispers. The more you play, the more you become aware of the pawn structure. Backwards pawns. Knights love to blockade backwards pawns. They practically beg you to let them blockade pawns. The knight is an ideal blockader. It's one of the powers of the knight. And you don't want to use a queen or a rook to blockade a pawn. That's beneath them. But a knight loves it because it takes away none of its attacking ability. And if you attack the knight with a queen, if the knight's defended, you're not going to worry about the queen taking your knight. So, know the relative value of the pieces. Know what it means. Sometimes, even though a rook is worth 5, and a knight or a bishop is just like 3, sometimes they're more valuable than the rook. based on their mobility. If the rook isn't very mobile, and your knight and your bishop are, who cares what their relative value is when all of the things are equal? Because in some cases, all of the things are not equal. This is a judgment that you develop, a discernment that can be subtle. And as you gain in strength, these things grow. You become better and better at noticing these things. So space, more space, more mobility. Relative value of the pieces is dependent on their mobility. It's not set in stone that a rook is stronger than a bishop. Usually it is. Sometimes it isn't. Now, above all, king safety. Checkmate ends a game. Don't lose your king. Support your king, protect your king. And your attack if you weaken the king safety of your opponent. That's when you play a game that you want to show everybody else. So be aware when your opponent's king is unsafe, and make sure that your king is safe. The element of time. This is one that comes and goes. Do you have the initiative now? Can you maintain it? This is something that even masters struggle with sometimes. Sometimes you misevaluate the initiative. The initiative peters out. You have nothing to show for it. And you've sacrificed material to gain the initiative, to dictate the course of the action. And it peters out. You're just down in material. So, this is a delicate balancing act. Which element is more important? It's a mixture of the elements that is important. To balance them, to see them all in action, to give them equal weight. And saying, oh my goodness, in this position, my king's safety outweighs concerns about development, space, material advantage. Oh, in this position, material is the most important. Oh, in this position, it's the pawn structure that gives one player the edge over the other. So there's no way I can tell you how to do this. It is a balancing act, and it does take time to develop, to learn how to do it well. But when you're beginning, when you're in the early stages of your development as a chess player, emphasize the tactics. Tactics, tactics, tactics. That will decide the vast majority of your games. And then as you get stronger, if you know tactics, then learn an opening system from white, from black, maybe even two systems from white side and black side that you can play to reach a reasonable position in the middle game. Because that's the only objective, to get reasonable. If you know your tactics, if you know your middle game complications, won't seem so difficult. They won't seem so complicated. They will seem simple. They will seem like they're intuitively obvious what moves to make. And then those endings, certain endings you must know. You must know how to mate with a queen. Queen and king versus king. You must know how to mate with king and rook versus king. And there's certain ending positions, like a rook and pawn versus rook. When is it won? When is it drawn? These are things that you must know. So allow you in your middle game to say, should I trade this piece for that piece? Well, the pawn structure will be your guide, but also which ending am I going into will be critical. That knowledge will help you decide. What seems to be a toss-up becomes clear. Yes, trade this piece for that piece, obviously. And this is when chess becomes fun. I wish you all the best. Enjoy your summer camp. And I think that you're in good hands with Chris Torres as your teacher. Thank you. This has been the Chess Files. The answers are out there with James Eade of the Eade Foundation.